I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the D2Z podcast. I'm the founder and CEO of Electric Marketing, which is an e-commerce agency. And today I'm joined by my longtime friend and D2C veteran, Jim Fosina. Jim is the founder of Amora Coffee. And not only is he using his D2C superpowers to grow that business, but he comes from a background of over 30 years in the marketing industry, specifically working at Fosina Marketing Group, growing and selling that company a little bit over 5 years ago now. Thanks for coming on the show, Jim. Super excited to have you here.
Hey, great, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but first we wanted to touch on ROI and basically how every dollar needs to be analyzed and how you've utilized sort of that framework to not only grow Fosina Marketing, but also to grow Amora Coffee. But before we jump into that, would you be able just to give a quick intro background about yourself?
So a quick intro background on myself is I am not a Gen Z, so I am a Gen X. So it's great to be here talking to Gen Z and how you're looking to approach the direct-to-consumer e-commerce and subscription audience. I've been in this business for over 34 years, long before e-commerce even started, but all direct-to-consumer and subscription marketing, working for companies like Kraft Foods and selling their coffee direct to consumer, and Nestle Waters and delivering water directly into the home, and book companies like Scholastic before the founding of my own direct to consumer business, Fosina Marketing Group. We brought over 100 clients to market during that time, and it was all about helping those clients pivot into the direct to consumer space as the evolution of e-commerce came about. Sold that company 3.5 years ago, but we held on to Amora Coffee. And Amora Coffee today is a 10-year-old direct-to-consumer coffee, of which we do a lot of work with you, Brandon. So you know the business very well. And but we also have a marketing firm called Margrad, where we help some of the more traditional companies pivot into direct-to-consumer commerce.
Touching on your background in the space, what are like one or two of the biggest call-outs you would say, and how the landscape has changed and evolved over your time in it?
So I'd say there's really two giant pivot points that have taken place during my time in direct-to-consumer and subscription. One was the introduction of the internet. So from a Gen Z standpoint, the internet has always been around. But today, and you look back 30 years ago, the internet wasn't always around. And so there is a rock solid direct-to-consumer discipline and approach that really hasn't changed as we move from traditional marketing to digital marketing. And we saw that happening in the latter part of the 1990s.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I don't even think about that. It seems foreign to me, the concept that there was a world in which there wasn't an internet. And I always joke with my parents, like, I don't know how you went to school. All I did was Google whatever the answers were going to be for homework, but you had to go to the library and open up a book or something like that. So it's crazy how quickly things have accelerated and changed.
Well, imagine having to reach your consumers through print or direct mail or magazines or broadcast, and email wasn't existent, and there was no social channels, but the whole concept of reaching consumers where they live and act and where their eyeballs are, that has been the significant change from traditional to the e-commerce. But we're going back 20 some odd years there. When was the next significant shift? The next significant shift actually happened just a couple of years ago with the onset of the pandemic. And the onset of the pandemic has caused an awful lot of retailers and traditional marketers to have to quickly pivot into the ability of reaching consumers at home, because consumers weren't coming out of their homes. Today, still consumers aren't coming out of their homes, and we're reaching more consumers in their houses and selling directly into the home. And that's a consumer purchase behavior that wasn't changed by a company. Like if you look at the latter part of the 1990s, you can credit Amazon for really starting to change consumer purchase behavior around e-commerce. But if you look at what happened just a couple of years ago with the pandemic, it was global. It wasn't a company, it was a pandemic. And it happened to everybody. And that's been a big adjustment for anybody in the direct-to-consumer space today, as Gen Z is already used to buying online, okay, and Gen X is okay with buying online. Baby boomers may be a little bit different, and then our millennials in between. Everybody has now shifted their consumer purchase behavior. So when the pandemic is over, and it will be over at some point, when the pandemic is over, that doesn't mean consumer purchase behavior is going to retreat. So we need to double down now on reaching our consumers in their homes.
That makes sense. I think the crossover between traditional retail and e-commerce is really going to blend more and more together as we move forward here. Especially because of the fact that the retail brands that maybe didn't have a direct-to-consumer presence or used like a third party to fulfill on their e-commerce operations, they recognize that when the pandemic started, they need that presence. So now almost everybody is omni-channel. And so the crossover between shopping online and shopping on store, it's something like half of consumers will browse in store and then buy online, and then the other half will browse online and shop in store. So as things have started to return a little bit to normal, you're starting to see an uptick in actually my generation wanting to get out there and to experience that in-store sort of experience that just can't be replicated elsewhere. But then that's driving online sales as well, which I feel about 5-10 years ago, there was this thought that if you had a strong retail presence, you didn't want to have a strong e-commerce presence because it would detract from your retail presence and vice versa. When in reality, consumers are shopping everywhere. Commerce is everywhere.
It's going to be critical for especially the large brands to have their retail presence, their touch and feel capability, and also have their direct-to-consumer convenience as well. And so, and you're right, you're going to have consumers who are going to cross over into both.
With the pandemic, there's never been more brands that are online. The numbers just came out from Shopify recently. It is like gangbusters growth in terms of how many online stores there are. So with that, there's never been more increased competition online. Where do you think this year is the opportunity for brands to be able to differentiate themselves from all the noise out there? Because everybody saw sort of this gold rush to e-commerce in 2020, but now it's a little bit saturated. How do you think brands can stand out this year moving forward?
It's critical for a brand to have a true value proposition to their consumer. Okay, and that value proposition can come in several different forms. Obviously, it's going to come in the product. It's going to come in the convenience. It may come in the what you stand for and who you support outside of your organization. But if you can't separate yourself from just the individual websites that pop up day to day through a Shopify, because it's easy. You can pop up a Shopify store very easily, and it causes noise and distraction. And so while it may not be a gigantic competitive threat, okay, noise and distraction absolutely makes it very easy for a customer to point, click, and defect to another product, even if it's just for trying another product. So I think the brands that stick to their discipline of their operating principles and why they exist and the value they're bringing to the consumer versus what the consumer is bringing to them, and them being loyal to the consumer versus that the brand expecting the consumer being loyal to the brand, those are the companies who are going to rise above the tide and really get their boats out on plane. The fact that anybody can pop up a store, that doesn't mean they have a true value proposition. So your value proposition is everything, and if you can't separate yourself from the other noise, then you're going to fall into the noise yourself.
I think it's important that that value proposition transcends both the website and all of the marketing channels that you're out on, because that way the messaging is consistent for the consumer. They can latch onto that and they know this is what let's say Amora stands for, or this is what X brand stands for. So it's a lot more powerful when that first ad you see is the same messaging that you're getting after your third order, just continuing to reinforce what the brand stands for.
You want to take all of the points of resistance in the purchase out of the way. So the more you can streamline it, the more you can unify it, and the easier you can make it for that consumer to make a purchase. That's paramount today. The custom approach, the unique approach of a checkout, that was 10 years ago. Today, consumers expect to be able to walk through the grocery store aisle and be able to find their meats in the back and their bakery on the right and their fruits and vegetables on the left, or vice versa. It's really important that all of those barriers to an easy purchase be put aside, because consumers just don't have the patience for it, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, even as simple thing as improving your site speed by half a second on mobile has a dramatic impact on conversion rates. Though I have seen recently a couple of brands make the foray into headless commerce, which was really all the rage, I feel like, of last year, but not necessarily understanding the level of support that is required to maintain such a thing with all the development and resources that have to go into it. So I think there's always finding that happy medium between having like best in class performance, but also still allowing yourself to be able to iterate quickly, which is one of the benefits to like staying on a Shopify hosted storefront, is the fact that you can plug and play something, test it, and be on your way in a day versus going through development sprints and things of that nature.
I've lived in both worlds, Brandon, headless and both on Shopify. And the difference is when you're headless, all of your innovation and all of your momentum is really coming from internal, which is great. That's fantastic. But when you are on a Shopify, the difference is that you have the opportunity to learn from everybody else as well, and flow with that momentum. And so, yes, your competition gets to learn from you as well, but you probably have a lot more to gain by being in a pool of much stronger momentum.
Yeah, and there's definitely value to being in an ecosystem that's continuing to innovate and invest in one another. I think that's where you're starting to see a lot of efficiencies this year with certain Shopify apps that have really become like best in breed within their category, and then are all interconnected with one another at the top. So allowing us as marketers to be able to create that seamless customer journey, even if the loyalty program, the review program, the email tool, the SMS tool, they might all be different companies, they integrate with one another so well that all the data is at your fingertips. And that's really the most important thing, is that the data is there for you to be able to segment, personalize content, and make sure that you're not just having this one size fits all approach across your brand.
5-6 years ago, one of the biggest hurdles into improving customer experience was having to build out separate APIs for every initiative you want to do. Today, those APIs are built out at an enterprise level.
Going back a couple of comments here, you mentioned the brand and how important that is. What role does the team play in that, and also keeping consistency with your team? Like, we're in this whole great resignation period where people are really evaluating whether or not they want to continue working at wherever they're working, or maybe they just want to stop working for a while and go freelance. So there's never been more opportunity available to people, especially in the digital space. How much a role does your team play in making sure that that core brand ethos stays true? And then also, what are some things that you've been doing, or how have you gotten to this point while having such great team member retention?
So first of all, I think the great resignation is going to be short-lived. I think it's going to be short-lived for a couple of reasons. People aren't going to want to constantly be moving around, or they're going to realize when they do ultimately resign and they early retire or whatever it is they're going to do, it'll get quite boring quite quickly. I actually think it's going to be a short-term situation, but there are learnings that us as company owners and employers should be taking away from it. I think my experience amongst my own team and the teams of the clients that I work with is that every team member really needs to feel like they are a significant part of the cause and a significant part of the initiative and the brand, and that they aren't just a role, they aren't just a function. If you're going to make your team members feel like they are a function and not a partner, then you run a higher risk of losing them to the Great Resignation or just to anybody else. We're always going to be faced with competing companies out there offering different types of positions and more exciting roles, and that's going to happen. But that's been going on for 100 years. Okay, that's not new. Okay, what's new here is that if you, as a manager, if you believe in surrounding yourself with people smarter than you in the areas of which you need their help, and you truly bring them in as a partner, not as a function, then you're going to hold on to them longer, because they do truly feel like they're part of the business. So if they're going to be an employee, you're going to lose them. If they're going to be a partner in the company, you're going to hold on to them. And everybody needs to be treated differently. It's not a one size fits all. And just respect them as you would want them to respect you. And you have a greater shot at holding on to them. Retention of our team is significant for us. In my last marketing firm, we had a very, very long average retention, years of average retention of our team members. Nobody's an employee, they're a partner.
And I think it's something that you really can't fake at all. It very much so is obvious if you're coming across as, oh yeah, well, you're a member of the team, this and that. But in reality, the proof is in the pudding. If you're delegating, you're giving ownership and responsibility, I mean, then they truly are a function of the team. And I think that's where your business has been able to thrive, why Electric has been successful up until this point, is that ownership and autonomy that's given to the team, where it quite literally is their thing. Like if they were to walk away, then there's not like we're just going to go find somebody else off the street and plug it in there. It's less of the Bill Belichick model where you do your job, do your role. There's 65 of you or whatever. We're just going to plug and play, and there's a system. It's more about bringing out like the innovation and the individuality of each person and allowing them to take ownership and run with their particular department, or just giving that freedom to explore new and interesting ideas. Just because you're a creative designer doesn't mean you can't take a class on life cycle marketing or something along those lines, just to give a random example. But I think something that we've been doing in the past recently, which has been insightful, is reaching out to the team and aggregating 3 things that we should be doing that we're not doing from each team member. So we got about 120 items back in November of these are all the things that we should be doing that we're not. And then taking that and actually walking through with the entire team, here's how we're addressing this. Here's why we're not addressing this yet, but this is what we're doing in the interim to get to this point. And just having that level of transparency, I think, has been invaluable. And it's not like, especially as a solo founder, like you were with Fosina Marketing, it's difficult to not have a sounding board to go off of, I feel like. So by utilizing the team and all of their expertise, that really will lift the company up.
Yeah, and you have to put trust in your team. You have to put autonomy into your team. And the way I've always approached it is, if somebody on my team is entrusting their career and their very precious hours and their income to the team that I'm heading, then I have a very similar obligation to them as they do to me, to make sure that we take care of each other. Otherwise, look, when somebody leaves, there's a piece of intellectual property that just goes out the door with them. And that's just, not that you're afraid they're going to take it someplace else, you have to retrain. And as employers, that it's really important we avoid that.
I think one of the hardest things for me is understanding that 100% team member retention isn't realistic, and that there are points where it's almost a good thing that your team member is moving on and they found this new position. You've helped them get from where they were to where they want to go. And that might not always be your own company, which for me was a little bit of a foreign concept, but as I've sort of grown over the last year and a half, it's something that I have found to be really sort of awesome to see, because not everybody's end goal or dream is to own their own marketing agency. It could be entirely something else, and Electric empowering them to take that stepping stone to whatever the next path in their career may be, that's something that is really powerful for sure.
We've had the opportunity to employ hundreds of people over the last 20 some odd years, and we've seen where they've gone and the companies that they lead, and how they've increased their career. And having had the opportunity to participate and contribute to that, for us, it's very satisfying. It feels good.
I would agree. So just shifting gears a little bit back to the e-commerce side of things, can we touch base a little bit on some of the most important KPIs that you're tracking this year, and also what level of granularity you think direct-to-consumer brands need to have over their ROI, especially as things get tighter and tighter with ads increasing and everything going on within the ecosystem?
So let's talk about disciplines, and then we can talk about the KPIs. Disciplines, from an operating principle standpoint, probably your most important discipline would be to make sure that any consumer that interacts with you, whether that's a client or that's really an end consumer, it doesn't matter. Anybody who interacts with you should be able to leave that interaction in a better frame of mind than they entered that interaction. It's critical. Okay, that doesn't mean the consumer is always right. Doesn't mean the client is always right. Okay, it just means that there is a middle ground of making sure that everybody feels good coming out of that conversation, and that drives success. The second part of that is the KPIs. The wonderful part about our business, okay, in direct to consumers, every single dollar we spend, it doesn't matter where we spend it. We could track back the return on investment and the relevance, the profit or the loss of that particular dollar that's being invested. And so we'll go way back, way before e-commerce, okay? And it's the exact same discipline in direct-to-consumer marketing. If you spend a dollar here, you should see what the return on investment is on the other side. And so you can look at that in a couple of different ways. We can look at the top of the funnel, and we can understand what's it costing us to get somebody into the top of the funnel. And then what are we doing internally to massage and manage and engage that consumer to come through the bottom of the funnel and ultimately become a buyer and build an LTV? Or another one of our KPIs is going straight to the bottom of the funnel. Okay, how much money are we spending so that we're at the bottom of the funnel, getting to a purchase, and now how many more times is that consumer going to buy from us? And whether it's a one shot coming off of our e-commerce store, they're going to buy from us 2 times, 3 times, okay, or whether it's a subscriber, they're going to buy from us 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. It's every dollar we spend in advertising has to have an ROI associated with it. And if we can't do that risk planning, and by the way, every dollar we spend does not turn into profit, okay? But for every test we put out there, if you can get 1 out of 5 tests to win, 4 to fail, 1 to win, you have a rollout candidate, and that rollout candidate is going to more than offset the testing costs of those 4 failures. And so if you can't read it, don't spend it. Otherwise, it's just reckless.
I would agree. And you've seen over the past couple of years, especially when probably say around like the 2015 to 2017 range, a lot of brands funneling millions of dollars into customer acquisition and not necessarily having that strong of a handle on retention metrics. Like I think everybody has been pretty familiar with on platform. Oh, we can look at Facebook, we can look at Google, we can look at TikTok, we can see what the CPA is, we can see what the ROAS is on that first purchase. Well, what the hell is actually happening to that person after they make that first order? It feels like until the privacy changes came, there were a lot of brands that didn't necessarily have as much of a focus and attention on that because it's just not as sexy for investors. It's not as sexy for the founders to come back and say, oh, well, 70% of our revenue came from returning customers versus, hey, we acquired 15,000 new customers this month. So I think that paradigm shift has happened in a pretty accelerated fashion because of the fact that people's top of funnels have sort of been cut off that traditionally they've relied on from a Facebook standpoint. So I think in the long run, it actually could probably benefit consumers because brands are really incentivized now to invest in that post-purchase experience, make sure that they're aggregating zero-party data in an artful and thoughtful way that's actually seen through the post-purchase experience, whether it's a coffee quiz where you're aggregating flavor profiles so you can tailor recommendations later on to the consumer, or if it's as simple as a post-purchase survey, like was this a gift or not? If you're a gifter, you should clearly be talked to in a different way than somebody who's not gifting. They're buying for themselves. So I think that will benefit things. Where I see there being a little bit of a disconnect is that the more Apple, Google clamp down on the privacy restrictions, the less targeted the communication can be at the top of funnel. So there's gonna be a lot of brands that are just like sort of spraying and praying and testing different audiences, testing different platforms. So that top of funnel is going to be a little bit of a mess. So it'll be interesting to see how things pan out there.
Which means that companies are going to have to look for different types of partnerships as well. So is it just going to be Facebook? Is it just going to be Google? Absolutely not. I can tell you that for the majority of the businesses that I've run, you take Facebook and you take Google, and they are a very small part of the entire acquisition budget and the acquisition funnel. Okay, and the larger part of the budget is going to be synergized partnerships with other brands where it makes sense for those two brands to collaborate. And that's the approach. That's an approach that is not new. That's an approach that I've been practicing over the past 30 years. But you can absolutely read it that way, and you at least know where the consumer is coming from. And sometimes it's going to work, and sometimes it's not going to work. And if we're going to spend all of our time and money and energy in Facebook and Google, okay, well, we're not doing the customer a great service either, because at the end of the day, the expense of that, because of the lack of visibility, has gone up so much that you wouldn't be able to hold your pricing to your consumer. I mean, with Amora Coffee, we're super proud of the fact that while everybody's raising coffee prices around the world because of the coffee shortage, we haven't had to raise our coffee prices. Are we taking it on the chin a little bit in margin? Sure we are. Okay, but we haven't raised our coffee prices because we do have a focused advertising campaign so that if we spend dollars, we know what the ROI is so that we are not spending dollars blindly. Otherwise, we would just have to pass that off to the consumer. And if the consumer is going to lose because we can't understand the advertising ROAS up front, well, then we're not doing any favors for our consumer and we're not building our brand. So we're hypersensitive to that.
Where do you think direct mail falls into place here in 2022? Because I've been seeing more and more sort of success on that front, but also just traditional media from, I would say, the late 90s, early 2000s coming back pretty strong with all these privacy updates.
So it's really interesting because, in the 90s and, really in the 80s, in the 90s, okay, the direct mail was really paramount. And that was a way of really reaching somebody's home. And it was a significant base of commerce. And so then when we go into the 2000s, then we get in 2010, and we see that direct mail has gone down for a couple of reasons. Consumers are less responsive to direct mail. The United States Postal Service isn't so friendly in delivering mail in terms of cost. What we're seeing now is a much smaller base of direct mail. And so it's a fraction of the size of what it used to be. So as we're starting to see some of the growth is a little bit more exaggerated now versus as to where it was. Okay, it is growing. There is an opportunity for direct mail, and that opportunity is likely going to live in the world of expanding your brand and your brand presence, or really targeting somebody who has sort of flirted with your website, but you just haven't closed the deal yet. I'm not sure we're ever going to see the days of where we're dropping direct mail campaigns of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 million pieces at a time. I think that's probably a thing in the past, from a response standpoint, from a cost standpoint with the United States Postal Service, from an environment standpoint. It's certainly not a carbon neutral type of approach, for sure.
I think on the retention side of things, it's interesting to potentially look at, oh, you've got a list of 25,000 people that were high value customers, haven't purchased in 6 months. Maybe you drop them into a direct mail campaign as like a retention tactic. That's something I've been thinking about as a potential way to sort of further invest in the relationship with the customer, and also maybe get to somebody that you can't get to through your traditional media channels anymore, because retargeting on Facebook isn't as powerful as it once was. Maybe they're not subscribed to email marketing anymore, but you still have that ability to reach them in the home.
And when you do that, depending on what kind of product you're selling, if you have a new introduction, maybe you want to give them a sample of it. For us, it would be pretty easy. So as we launch a new line of coffee or a new flavor of coffee, and we want to re-engage somebody from the past, we wouldn't just send them a mailing and say, hey, come on back. We'd give them a pot of coffee on us and then ask them to come back.
Well, I thank you again for coming on. This has been really insightful. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out or get in touch with you?
Well, if you want to reach out, you can always find me on my LinkedIn at Jim Fosina, or you could email me at jfosina@amoracoffee.com.
Awesome. So again, everybody, if you need to find Jim Fosina on LinkedIn or amoracoffee.com. Thank you all for listening in. This is Brandon Amoroso, and you can find me at brandonamoroso.com or Electric Marketing. Thank you all for tuning in. And Jim, pleasure having you on. We'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Great fun, Brandon. Thanks a lot. And thank you to everybody. Have a great day.